Welcome to the BrightWord Books Podcast. BrightWord is a leading platform for diverse storytelling, where voices from all backgrounds can share their unique narratives and connect with readers from around the world. Follow our regular podcast updates, where we strive to foster a literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature.
Welcome to BrightWord Books Podcast. I'm Nancy Gregory. Today, we're joined by Barry Gold, retired pharmacologist and author of We're Overdosed, a critical examination of America's opioid crisis. We'll discuss how opioids became America's shadow pandemic, why traditional approaches fail, and the most promising interventions emerging today. A conversation equal parts sobering and solutions-oriented. Barry Gold, welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be invited to do so.
Oh, it's so great to talk to you. You know, We're Overdosed tackles a very serious and timely issue, opioid addiction. What motivated you to write this book and explore the history of opioids in such depth?
Well, let's start with the concept that I'm a pharmacologist. I'm an expert on drugs. So what else would a pharmacologist write about except drugs?
Right.
Although I wrote about myself in my second book. And with pain, I wrote about myself.
Yes.
I started writing the history of opium because I'm interested in history, because especially natural products such as opium or digitalis for your heart or tobacco that we all know. And natural products track human history. And that's why I started to write about opium history. But before I knew it, the subject grabbed me and said, dig deeper, dig deeper, dig deeper. And the deeper I dug, the more I liked writing it. And 4 years later, I had a book, and I was lucky. I have a good agent. And she published it, and now I'm on screen.
Absolutely. 4 years to write the book.
4 years of research, yes.
Wow.
Now, that said, I went through a divorce. I forged a new romantic relationship. We're 6 years into it now. And I single parented my son. Mm-hmm. So I only write in the morning.
That's
when my mind is not melted yet.
Okay.
With everything I have to do that day.
Yeah, every author has their process, and some people like writing in the evening, and some people it's morning. Yeah. The book spans the evolution of opioids from opium's origins to modern day addiction crisis. How did you approach the research and presentation of such a vast and complex topic?
Interesting question. I mentioned that I started looking at the history, and then I tried to structure a narrative arc. And believe me, when I started writing, I did not know what a narrative arc was, and I learned the hard way. My particular knack at writing is I can read medical literature and put it in simple English so you're not subject to a medical lecture. And that's how I tracked opium, by looking in the medical literature. And I read my old textbooks, and I started my career teaching medical school, so I had a lot of textbooks. And that's how I tackled the subject, by beginning with the history. And then I thought, all right, let me weave in a little bit of my own experience. And my first chapter reflects that experience. A while ago, I taught a class of recovering addicts. And they enjoyed my lecture. It was entitled Pharmacology of Drugs of Abuse at what was Jersey City State University. I don't know what they call it now. Mm-hmm. And I went down for lunch, and for the strangest reason, my entire class followed me down and sat around me. And I was flattered. I thought, oh, they like me. Well, it turns out they were curious about me and they leaned over and said, "Why do you teach us?" I said, "What do you mean? It's for me, it's payback. I share my knowledge with you. I have deep knowledge of drugs and I share it with you. It's what I like to do." I said, "Why do you ask?" "Because only addicts are interested in us. And yet you're here. Are you an addict too?" I said, "No, I've never gone near the stuff. I don't like it." But that struck me as so tragic that these people stumbled into these drugs, and I give them all the credit for leaving them
Right.
alone after many years. And yet they claim no one's interested in them except other addicts. And that bothered me because I think everyone has potential. And
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Everybody has potential.
so that's my story, and that's how I tackled the subject and how I got into it, both by being motivated by these kids who are dedicating their lives to becoming drug counselors, and at the same time looking at the history of opium because it's interesting. It stems from the part of the world where humanity seems to have begun.
Mhm. In your book, you address both the history of the opioid crisis and potential solutions. What role do you believe federal legislation could play in controlling the spread of prescription opioids?
Interesting question, because I do believe they have to be managed separately from the illicit opiums,
Mm-hmm.
illicit opioids. The our drug regulatory areas in our government are fragmented. We have the DEA, the SAMHSA, Substance and Mental Health Administration. We have NIDA, the National Institute of Drug Abuse. They're all focused on a separate part of drug legislation, the FDA, which licenses drugs. And I said, wait a minute. When I was in industry managing international drug development, I managed using a team approach, and my teams were always multidisciplinary. Why can't we regulate drugs centrally? Number one, centrally, not by state as we do now.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, by one person. All these different departments should report to one person, perhaps cabinet level. Pardon me for reorganizing our government, but what's a democracy for?
Right.
And that's my idea for regulating legal drugs, drugs of licensed drugs. The illicit market is a separate question.
Right. One of the most tragic aspects of the opioid epidemic today is the rise in overdose deaths. Can you speak to the importance of addressing not just prescription opioids, but also the illegal opioid trade, as you described?
Well, you mentioned opioid deaths, and I think few people understand that last year, 111,000 Americans died from opiate overdose, and 70% of them had fentanyl in their bloodstream. So, how did fentanyl go from a legal drug, I've had it as an anesthetic agent, to an illicit drug? And how do we get control of this, since the DEA tells us fentanyl is coming from China? Fentanyl has replaced heroin as a drug of abuse. We no longer see heroin deaths. We see fentanyl deaths. And it's very sad. In fact, it bothers me. If we remember back 3 years during COVID, the news every night showed us wearing masks, having Zoom classes, staying away from our offices, being told to stay home, don't transmit disease, don't breathe on anyone. And we were killing maybe 70,000 people a year due to COVID. And we're killing twice that now with opium, and it's not on the news. So I think publicly, as a public service, it has to reach the news now. And there was a TV special the other night. I think it was CNN, and they looked at the opioid crisis in America. And you know what? In an hour of broadcast, they never discussed some ideas for getting control of the problem. They focused on addicts, and they interviewed addicts only. That's not how to run a public health service,
Right.
not how to treat public health in our country. Our country looks at news and wants to learn from news. Anyway, your question had to do with illicit drugs. How do we get control of illicit drugs? Well, it turns out that I'm going to speak to fentanyl now because it is killing the most people in our country. Fentanyl comes from China. And someone asked me during an interview, is that an act of war on the Chinese part? I said, well, they're killing Americans. How does that sound? And I won't eat in a Chinese restaurant anymore because I think they're after me. But the problem is, how do we tell China, don't sell this junk in America anymore? And what do the Chinese do? They used to send the fentanyl to Mexico. The Sinaloa cartel would draft people, Americans, to transmit the drug across the border and then distribute it once it's in the country. They don't send the drug anymore. They send what are called the precursors, the components that can be assembled into fentanyl. And they ship those to Mexico. The Sinaloa cartel hires chemical majors in colleges to work on the drug and make it into fentanyl, and they send it across the border and it reaches the United States. What do we do in those cases? Well, as I say, a totalitarian government like the Chinese ought to be able to get control of this drug issue. And that suggests that maybe they're making money on it as well. That's political. I don't want to get into politics. How do we prevent it from coming over from Mexico? Well, the DEA has identified the precursors, and now they're trying to interdict the precursors in the Pacific Ocean if they're coming in by ship. Now, the thing to remember about fentanyl is its extreme potency. There's enough fentanyl, illicit fentanyl, in our country to kill every American. It's that potent.
Wow.
It's nasty stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It's important to remember that fentanyl derivatives like carfentanil and alfentanil were synthesized to anesthetize horses. Well, if they anesthetize a horse, what would they do to a human? We're much smaller. They'd kill us. Yeah. So it's a problem I can only think about because I have no interest in politics at my age.
Right.
Secondly, I'm having fun writing. I'm enjoying it. And thirdly, I think it is a process for the government, if they reorganize drug management, to say, how can we troubleshoot this issue internationally? And they'll come up with an answer, but they haven't yet.
Well, writing about addiction and the opioid crisis is an incredibly sensitive subject. How did you balance the scientific facts with the emotional aspects of the crisis to make the content accessible without diminishing its severity?
I live by the dictum that I can talk to anyone. And that means a college professor or a truck driver. Doesn't matter. If I talk to a truck driver, I'm not going to give him a medical lecture.
Mhm.
But I talk to the truck drivers because I say everyone has something to teach me. So that's how I balanced it by saying, all right, I want to focus on college-educated non-scientists. I believe that's my readership.
Okay.
But I don't want to give a medical lecture. So how do I balance my language against the concepts that I want to present? And that's my talent, if you will, or knack.
Superpower.
All right. I can let's say translate. I don't want to say dumb down.
Mhm.
I'll say translate medical literature into human speech and explain to you how drugs work in simple English by analogy. And that's what I do. That's how I try to write the book. And I had readership, and people read it and said to me, chapter 4 is getting very technical. So that means I went back and I edited chapter 4 so that I wasn't being too technical, because I don't want to write a technical treatise.
Well, with your background as a pharmacologist, how did your expertise shape the way you approach writing We're Overdosed?
Well, once again, it allows me to read medical literature and make sense of it, and then think of an analogy and present the analogy. For example, drugs work through receptors. What's a receptor? Think of a lock and switch. Think of a switch on the wall. That's a receptor. You activate the receptor by clicking the switch. That's all it is.
Yeah.
So I use analogy to explain difficult technical subjects. And if you say I succeeded, thank you.
Was there a particular experience that stood out to you while you were writing this book?
Well, sure. The experience with those addicts
Mhm.
who said no one talks to us except other addicts. That bothered me for years, and it became my first chapter. Secondly, I found myself reaching out to politicians and saying, can I interview you for the book I'm writing? And some of them said yes, and then a couple of them are well known. And that was an interesting experience because I don't think politically treating opiate addiction is yet a big subject in our government.
Mhm.
COVID was, opiates aren't yet. I find myself being the loudest voice out there, which is a little daunting, but
Yeah.
but I am the loudest voice out there.
Did you encounter any challenges in writing the book?
Sure, when people wouldn't talk to me, I had to use a mechanism other than interview to get at their attitude. And that proved a challenge.
Mhm.
The other challenge I faced writing the book was the sheer amount of research that went into the book. I read 6 other books, and I have a stack of reprints in my basement
Wow.
that I translated for the book. But I enjoyed writing it. I felt I was on a mission.
In your book, you share new treatments and approaches to addiction that offer hope. What are some of the most promising developments in addiction treatment that you think people should know about right now?
Interesting. People vilified the pharmaceutical industry over the OxyContin story. And I won't do that because the industry supported me very, very nicely for my entire career. After I left academics, I joined the pharmaceutical industry. The industry has changed, I think. When Purdue Pharma was marketing OxyContin on TV, they grew their market share to $1 billion drug. And the rest of the industry took a look at them and said, we have to have an opiate. We need an opiate. Look at the market that they've developed.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they've gotten away from that, what I call Me Too marketing. And the industry now is trying to find a mechanism, a drug-induced mechanism, whereby they can treat pain without the danger of addiction. And that's the challenge right now in our pharmaceutical industry.
Are they getting close?
I've not heard of any new drugs yet, so I don't think so.
Okay.
It's a decade-long process, though, because then they'll have to seek FDA approval. And to seek FDA approval, they have to do clinical studies.
Mm-hmm.
And clinical studies are expensive.
And take a long time.
And take upwards of a year.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You've clearly been an advocate for addressing addiction on a systematic level. How do you envision this book contributing to broader public awareness and perhaps legislative change?
I feel it necessary to tell you that the book is being looked at for a documentary movie.
Exciting.
Perhaps.
Yeah.
When the check is in the mail, I'll be
Yes.
excited.
Yeah. Yeah.
But that said, that means that the reason I wrote the book was to share my knowledge. Well, what do you do when you share your knowledge? You teach. And I enjoy teaching. Okay, if I'm sharing my knowledge, that means I'm not being judgmental. I'm just simply saying, folks, this is what the drug does. And this is, draw your own conclusions. And I came up with a saying. I said, these drugs have baited hooks. Don't get caught.
Mm-hmm.
It won't be your fault. It'll be the drug taking over your life.
Yeah.
So I try to teach people, don't try it. Or if you do, please understand that you are at risk for an addiction. I hope that answers your question.
Absolutely. Having spent years researching and advocating for addiction awareness, what do you hope will be the lasting impact of We're Overdosed on readers and policymakers?
Oh, the answer to it is just what I said. The industry has to come up with non-opiate drugs for treating severe pain, because there are segments of our society that have to function using opiates. For example, cancer patients.
Mm-hmm.
We can't tell them, go suffer. That's not how we treat people. We treat people by saying, how can I decrease your suffering? Well, by using drugs that don't cause addiction. And that's the challenge for the industry right now. And they're hankering for it. They're going for it. I don't know which companies, I can't name them, but
Right.
I'm pretty certain that something will show up in the literature in the next 5 years.
Are there any other topics within the realm of pharmacology or addiction that you're passionate about exploring in future projects?
I have a proposal into my agent to write a book about marijuana.
Oh,
And she said, what's your position on marijuana? I said, it doesn't matter what my position is. My goal is to teach people about marijuana. That's all.
right.
And to tell you that if you're going to get stoned, don't drive.
Yeah.
Treat it like alcohol.
I
That's
think
all.
there's a misconception there. Yeah, treat it like alcohol for sure. Lastly, Barry, with such a crucial message, and We're Overdosed, what would you say to those who are currently struggling with addiction or those who love someone who is?
I do address that in the book, and I say we all have to become active. What does that mean? That means if you have a neighbor who's suffering with drug addiction, offer to find a rehab for the person.
Mm-hmm.
Don't be judgmental and say, listen, you're a worthless junkie. Let me help you. No. approach that person and say, I want to help you. You look like you're suffering. Let me find you a rehab. And if the patient agrees, you've done a service for that person. If you have a relative who's suffering with addiction and you find that relative unconscious from the drug, save that patient's life. Call the ambulance, dial 911. They all have Narcan on board. Narcan is a drug rescue agent, opiate rescue agent, and the ambulance will come take your relative away. And then say to the relative, listen, you're sick. I'm here to help you. Can I find a rehab for you? And that's all. Just be active. Don't be passive. That's my message to people.
Barry Gold, thank you for this vital, vital conversation about We're Overdosed and the opioid crisis. It really was a pleasure. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you very much for the questions. Read my book.
Yes, absolutely. The book is available now on Amazon and all major booksellers. For more of Barry's work, visit barryigold.com. And thanks for joining us on the BrightWord Books podcast. Until next time, stay informed, stay engaged, and keep reading.
You've been listening to the BrightWord Books Podcast, home of the literary community that celebrates creativity, inclusivity, and the transformative power of literature. Don't forget to subscribe so you'll never miss future episodes. Until next time, stay informed and stay engaged.